Rubio's done a great job, and he should be much more high profile. He should be negotiating, I think, the Ukraine war. Rubio did, and have him be in response. Everybody reports to Rubio. He was a pope for this age, though, Jack.
Yeah.
This age has gone to the left. And I don't know why we're more prosperous than we ever have been. We're more free and secure, but boy, on the left, we're having a Maoist cultural revolution or something like that.
Hello, ladies. Hello, gentlemen. This is the Victor Davis Hanson Show. I am Jack Fowler, the host. You're here to listen to and get wisdom from our namesake, Victor Davis Hanson, who is the Martin and Ely Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and the Wayne and Marcia, I should say, not Barsha. I don't know who she is. The Wayne and Marcia Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College. And Victor is... You can see him there. If you're watching this on YouTube, he's chowing away, drinking away.
Pierre right. Poilievre,
Appleman. Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to emulate.
Well, I hope.
Actually, I'm on my 7th week of a sinus infection. I'm trying to take something like apples for my 2nd round of antibiotics.
Because
is that true? They have malate in it, right? They kind of stuff you up. Versus the other effect of antibiotics.
I thought apples.
Let's not talk about it. Let's just.
Okay.
You were supposed to pray to Saint Nozzle.
Oh boy. Well, we're going to talk about prayerful things today, Victor, because we're recording on the day after Easter, Monday, the 21st of April, and today Pope Francis died. He died this morning, and that has some obvious ramifications for Roman Catholicism and broader moral issues, global issues. The aforementioned Poilievre, the apple-eating possible Canadian Prime Minister? I don't think so. There's elections a week from today. By the way, this episode will be up on Tuesday, the 22nd. Scottish women get the British Supreme Court to declare that women are women. Women without appendages are women. Lady astronauts, Ambassador Whitkoff. So we have all these things to get Victor's take on, and we'll do that when we come back from these important messages.
I'm going to have another bite of the apple.
We are back with the munching and crunching Victor Davis Hanson Show. You got to do it. You got Victor, do it live. Take care of yourself live.
I got to do. I just took an antibiotic, and I want to make sure I.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Well, let's be nice here, Victor. Don't say bad things about the dead. But Pope Francis,
Nihil dicere nisi bonum de mortuis. Never say a bad thing. Never say anything bad never say anything except good about the dead. Well, the recently dead.
Correct. We can be a little honest here, maybe.
Yes. He was our first Jesuit pope.
I believe so. First Jesuit. He was from Argentina. He led the Jesuits in that country. When he came to, his predecessor, Benedict, resigned, first pope ever to resign from office and retire. And I think Jose Bergoglio, that was Pope Francis's name, seemed at very first, there was some appeal even to people like me, traditional Catholics, hardcore Catholics. And then over the years, boy, oh boy, made it tough to, as a Catholic, you're supposed to pray for the Pope. We pray for the Pope, but he made things difficult, I think particularly for American Catholics. He seemed to have had an animus for America.
I think he was a Peronist, if I could say that.
Yeah, you can.
Which would, I think, we could define Juan and Eva Peronism as sort of coerced socialist redistribution, holistically applying to the economic, political, cultural, social life of Argentina, and it more or less wrecked the country. Which in the 50s and 60s, early 50s, at least, it was on a trajectory to match the GDP of North America. And then Peronism destroyed it. But he was the first pope that I think really was a unabashed, unapologetic man of the left, and thought that that ideology would be that the left redistribution ideology reflected the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, or things like John, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to go to heaven. I think that's the part of the New Testament that he focused on, but I could be wrong. As compared to, say, Pope Paul or Pope John, I said, the Polish Pope, he was somewhat political, but he was more open to even opposing views, fought communism. He was a pope for this age, though, Jack.
Yeah.
This age has gone to the left. I don't know why we're more prosperous than we ever have been. We're more free and secure, but boy, on the left, we're having a Maoist cultural revolution or something like that, where people are advocating violence. There's a professor today from George Mason that wrote on social media that there was no other opposition, there was no other alternative pathway, trajectory for the left other than to kill people. And I think he was a graduate student, a teaching assistant. And with that, we keep talking about that Rutgers poll where of people who identified of the left, over half thought that Trump could be killed. And it's just a different, and now we have this revolution within the Democratic Party of the Maoists, if I could use that term, the Jacobins versus the old guard. And the old guard had moved pretty hard left to accommodate them. But when you have a guy like David Hogg, who's 25 and really has done nothing in his life, I mean, he was a tragic mass shooting at a school, but I can't think of anything he did himself. There's no record of political acumen or getting people elected, maybe raising money for particular causes. And if he's the face of the new Democratic Party, at least one of the two faces, and his boss from Minnesota is even more left-wing, we'll see. It's a very frightening time because while all this is going on the left, then you've got Donald Trump waging a counter-left revolution. And it's driving them even more and more crazy and more to the left. But it's scaring a lot of the independents. And anyway.
One other thing about the Pope, on the lines of what you were saying of leftism, is the embrace of climate change as a core sacrament almost.
Yes,
secular sacrament.
How about open
that I think is the big thing. And that's the thing that is, for me, most troubling, Victor. The obsession about non-spiritual things, non-doctrinal things. But what destroys and disrupts a civil society more than just massive? Let me take 10,000 people and plunk them in this little Italian village, or 10,000 in this Irish town. And what does he not, or the church leaders not, think civil society is something that deserves to be protected? And
Vatican City, I've been there a lot, and it has Renaissance era formidable fortifications right around it. So the purpose, because they haven't been dismantled, to have an open border, and it is an independent entity, is that it would like to define itself as separate from, I guess, governmentally or spiritually from Italy. It's an independent entity, and therefore it feels it has a unique culture, and therefore it feels that people should not just be able, for security or other reasons, walk into the Vatican whenever they want. And they have barriers to prevent that, and they are pretty successful. But when you apply that logic to a larger country, he seemed to have problems with that. That's the whole problem with all of these people who say, A, walls don't work, and B, they're discriminatory, and in the global 21st century, we don't need them. And then when you look at every aspect of their public and personal ideology, they're adherents of walls and separatism. These grandees, Joe Biden kept talking, had an open border, but you couldn't just walk onto the White House grounds. And he had all kinds of security. He was famous even as vice president for, he had Secret Service around him, and he charged the Secret Service money for their observation post on his property. He really did believe, and we saw that with the iconic Martha's Vineyard escapade, where people did not want people coming in there. And all this stuff about Mr. Garcia and whether he should come back or what was his status, it's all predicated on the idea that the arguments are in the abstract, but nobody would want to have him live next to them and have his former associates visit him in their neighborhood or in their home or it's just, everybody likes security for themselves, but on the global idea, they feel good about themselves without barriers, or they prefer open borders as long as it doesn't impact themselves. And that's a characteristic of the left these days. It's cosmic morality, but I have to have exceptions if I'm AOC or Bernie Sanders to fly private and have this huge carbon footprint, and then talk about, and she's been on record, changing subject a little bit, AOC, about the evils of private jet travel.
Yeah. Well, we remember George Orwell's pig saying some animals are more equal than others, and that's what we see with the left. They are the more equal.
And Bernie the same way. He has 3 houses. 40% of America can't afford one, and he's identifying with them as victims, and yet he's never really had a job in the private sector, so he's been able to translate his government service into a multi-million-dollar portfolio and 3 homes, and yet he rails about people who do that on a grander scale than he does.
Yeah. Well, Victor, one last thing from me anyway, not to saturate our listeners with Catholicism, but we Catholics do believe at these moments that the Holy Spirit hopefully guides the conclave of cardinals. But the thing that worries people like me are, well, the last conclave, which was consisted of cardinals appointed by Benedict and Pope John, now he's a saint, St. Pope John Paul II, conservative men picked this man. What is the conclave filled with cardinals picked by Francis going to pick as his successor? So it's a very worrisome time for a lot of us. That said, Victor, I just want to let our listeners know we're going to be back in a moment. I wanted to know if you would share some thoughts on Steve Whitkoff. And our friend, John Fund, wrote this analysis of him. Let me just read this pretty quickly. John writes, "I'm not a foreign policy expert, but I've learned to recognize when someone is clearly out of his depth in that area. And this is clearly the case of Steve Whitkoff, a real estate investor and golfing buddy of President Donald Trump's from his old stomping grounds in Queens, New York. Whitkoff, nominally the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, has become Trump's all-purpose emissary for almost all of today's key foreign policy issues. One day he's meeting with Vladimir Putin to settle the Ukraine conflicts. The next day he's negotiating with Hamas to urge the group toward a ceasefire with Israel. And a few days later, he's interacting with the Iranians on their nuclear weapons program. Whitkoff's travel schedule is often busier than Secretary of State or CIA director. Victor, people are starting to roll their eyes and lament and moan. Is this guy successful? What are your thoughts?
I have no criticism per se, except sometimes he's been indiscreet and he has to correct himself. But my point is that no one, even Henry Kissinger, when he was in the shuttle diplomacy of 1974, there were other people in his entourage that were, I guess his name was Cisco, and other people that were helping him. In other words, he was trying to do Vietnam, he was trying to do détente, he was trying to do China, he was trying to do the Middle East, and he was spread thin, and he had auxiliaries or subordinates that helped him. So when you take a businessman who supposedly gets things done and you put him in the Iranian nuclear negotiations, the Hamas hostage negotiations, the Ukrainian war, the attitude toward Russia, he's overtaxed. He's spread too thin, and he hasn't done this before. So my polite suggestion to the administration would be to assign him something that he feels comfortable. I think it would be probably the Hamas or that negotiation. I don't know. I mean, I can see why the Trump administration did not bring Mike Pompeo back. I don't agree with it necessarily, but they thought that he wanted to run for president, and he had been critical of aspects of January 6th, and he had been critical, at least momentarily, of the Mar-a-Lago raid that something Trump done had partly justified. All that being said, he was on base with Trump on Iran. He was on base with Putin. So I don't see why a guy like that couldn't be an additional special envoy. I know he might get the MAGA base. I don't quite understand why the MAGA base has got... He was a good Secretary of State is what I'm saying. But people like that. And I would get 2 or 3 of them to operate with a single portfolio. But he's got too many portfolios to do it. And then more importantly, he's nominally working for the Secretary of State, who's the architect of foreign policy, and you don't get the impression that his profile should not be higher than Marco Rubio or Waltz, the national security advisor. Usually when you have rivalries about key foreign policy debates within a administration, you have the national security advisor and the Secretary of State. That's why Kissinger combined the two in himself. There's always rivalry there. Usually the Secretary of State feels he has loyalty to this huge cabinetcy, and the National Security Advisor is more hawkish. But that being what it said, this diminishes Rubio's role, and Rubio's done a great job, and he should be much more high profile. He should be negotiating, I think, the Ukraine war. Rubio did, and have him be in response. Everybody reports to Rubio on the Ukraine war, and then have Waltz give him the portfolio of the nuclear. The particular assignment's not important, but utilize those 2 official positions, and then let Whitkoff just have one portfolio, because he's clearly overtaxed and he's got too many things.
Yeah. Well, Victor, before we go to a break, and part of the love of the show is the authenticity of it, the biting of apple, the dogs barking in the background.
I'm a mess. I apologize to my listeners. I
It's
had
lovely.
the flu, then I had a sinus infection. It goes away for a day, and then it comes back worse.
I have to ask you, though, about dogs.
This is a stray dog. Somebody dumped this dog, and my wife decided to nurture and save it. And it's a new little dog, and we had just 2 dumped the other day. That's an editorial, everybody, on what's happening when illegal immigration is in the news, and people are not at ground zero. They have no idea of the minor, major, whatever you want to call them, fallout or collateral damage. But when I see dogs now every 3 or 4 weeks dumped at our house, people drive by and they say, wow, it doesn't, it looks like they might have some means because the driveway looks nice or something. They just pull in and dump them. And then, oh, wow, there's an orchard. It's near town. I'm just going to unload. And it made me sick this morning when I was walking where I grew up in this pond. There is a washer, a dishwasher, a dryer, a huge freezer, a refrigerator, 20 bags of trash, all the literature in the trash except the address, which should identify the dumper. It's all in Spanish. It's all over it's a beautiful, natural. And when I was farming it, I would pick up if somebody left an individual cup, it was immaculate. And I don't own it anymore. My brother sold it. So my point is that it drives me nuts.
Yeah.
And that's what the dog is. It's just, poor thing was dropped starving, as they all are. And then you feed them. And then if you, the local pound is actually so full that they tell you there's no room. There's no room to kill them quick enough. So then you don't know what to do. So, my wife said, well, I don't know if it's got any shots or not. I don't know if it's spayed. And then you go through all of that. So I don't even know if it's had rabies shots. It's just sitting in our yard.
Yeah, it's more than an inconvenience, especially if you have a tender heart for God's man's best friend. Did you see the left came out? Well, I forget what study about a week ago that dogs are bad for the world. You know, they kill things, they foul the environment, etc. Same people that
Yeah,
want us to eat bugs want us not to have
what do they
pets.
want? They say everything. Eating meat is bad for the world. They want to
Uh-huh.
eliminate that. They micromanage our whole lives. But then you think, if we did everything that they want, what great thing would they do? What would they be empowered? How would they be freed from all of these pathologies that we inflict on them? Would they write a great, would they do another Homer's Iliad? Would they write the Inferno? Would they do Michelangelo's David? What great art would they give a Getty? No, I don't see anything coming out of what they're doing. All I see is bitterness and insecurity and envy and hate. When I listen to Bernie Sanders or AOC or Nancy Pelosi or this Senator Van Hollen going down, I don't see any positivity. And
We
so,
know people in our lives who enjoy seeing other people grovel or be inconvenienced, and as a movement, as an ideology, I think that's central to the left. It's
no,
just
it's
the
absolutely
thrill of
true.
that.
I wanted to get solar panels about 8 years ago, and it took like 4 months to get the inspector came out here, and came out and he said, well, where's I don't have it on my files, this building. I said, it's ag exempt. It was built before the new regulations. He said, well, then I have to have a proof that it was there. I said, you can see it. And I said, is there anything is the circuit breaker box out of all the Romex are cabled and they're in conduit as everything? No, it all meets inspection, but I don't have this building on my record, so you can't put panels on. I said, if you walk a half a mile, you'll see about 9 dwellings, all of them with bare Romex, porta potties, maybe 50 people living in a house zone for single people, dogs that are on license. Why don't you just walk over there and see how many regulations you can find? Because I think you could find 50 in about an hour that have been broken. But you won't do that. You want to come over here because I'm very polite to you. And I said, yes, sir, I will address that. And you know that I will go out and I'll go through every archive in my entire family. I will find a document that shows this building was in existence before 1994. I will show when it was built. And I will go to the county planning and I will get it on your record for you. And it'll take me 2 months and about 50 hours, but that'll make you feel really good and powerful. But if you go over there and you try to tell that Wild West area, and it's a whole area, you don't know what you're going to find. You don't know what you're going to find. You don't know what the people are going to do to you, and you won't go there because you won't feel big about yourself. You'll feel small and scared. And that's the problem with all of these, when you get these huge government octopuses and these people who have not had experience in the private sector, they get an emotional delight out of forcing people to grovel. They can't be just polite. When I said that, he didn't really disagree with me.
Right? Yeah. I love you, Victor. That was spot on, my friend. Spot on. Okay, we're going to be back and let's talk next about the aforementioned Canadian elections and lady astronauts, and we'll get to Trump and Harvard, all when we come back from these important messages.
If you're a homeowner, you need to listen to this. When's the last time you checked on your home title? That's the legal proof that you own your house. If you're like me, the answer to that is never. The problem is, in today's AI and cyber world, scammers are stealing home titles and your equity is the target. Here's how it works. Criminals forge your signature on one document, use a fake notary stamp, pay a small fee with your county, and boom! Your home title has been transferred out of your name. Then they take out loans using your equity or even sell your property. You won't even know it's happening until you get collection or foreclosure notices. That's why you need to stop what you're doing today and find out if you're already a victim. go to hometitlelock.com/Victor to make sure your title is still in your name. And you'll also get a free title history report, plus a free 14-day trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That's 24/7 monitoring of your title, urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud should happen, they'll spend up to $1 million to fix it. That's hometitlelock.com/Victor. And we'd like to thank Home Title Lock for sponsoring the Victor Davis Hanson Show.
We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show, recording on a Monday, the 21st of April. This episode will be up tomorrow, Tuesday, the 22nd. Victor has a website. I forgot to mention it at the beginning. That is The Blade of Perseus, victorhanson.com. At the end of the show, I'll tell you why you should subscribe. If you're a fan of Victor, you gotta be there. You gotta subscribe. Hey, Victor, I didn't ask you that you spent Easter with the children, grandchildren. Yes.
Yes, I spent Easter. My daughter and her husband have 3 children, and my son and his wife have 2 children, and they all met. My daughter moved up to Northern California in the foothills outside of Sacramento. Beautiful little place where they had Easter egg hunts, and drove up there. It's 220 miles, not that far. So it's very nice.
Close. What do they call What do they call grandpa? What's your poppy, or what, you just go?
Well, I don't see. I mean, it's not like the extended family that I grew up when I had my grandparents living here and my brothers living here, and it was kind of tribal. We were all, so they don't see me very much. So I'm referred to, my daughter and son refer to me as grandpa or something, but they call me Victor.
Oh. Wow.
Which is good.
Hey, Victor. Très intéressant. Hey, speaking with a French accent, or I think that's a French accent, Canada will have its elections next Monday on the 28th. Actually, elections have begun. They've had advanced voting. And Pierre Poilievre this is a snap election. He's the conservative candidate. Mark Charney is the liberal who took the place of Trudeau. He called the snap election, and right now the polls show the Liberals ahead. And I think, Victor, there's got to be some culpability for this with Donald Trump. It seemed, a few months ago when Trudeau was the captain of the sinking ship that this was the Conservatives were going to rout. I could be wrong, but what are your thoughts about what's happening up there?
What was wrong? What's wrong with Canada? Mr. Trudeau, we all thought that he was an aberration, that he was a man-child, or, he voted in because of his looks, because he showed no intellectual ability. He was kind of very vindictive. We saw that with the trucker strike. But everybody thought, if you look at terms of per capita income and GDP, unemployment, inflation, military expenditures, and NATO promises, relations with us, you got the impression that Canada was stalled, and that the conservative elements that had once been with this great Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, who was gifted, a free market advocate, and really had Canada going in the right direction after a decade, I suppose, that they wouldn't go back to this failed. But who are we to speak? We had, under the first 3 years of Trump, everything was going well, and then we got rid of that, and we got somebody who was Obama on steroids as far as policy. That is, whoever was, signing with the auto pen the Biden initiatives. So I think that, and Donald Trump does not like Poilievre. He doesn't like him, and I don't know why he doesn't. I think his attitude is he's a conservative, so he should be kind and favorable to me, but he doesn't understand Canadian policy. He understands Canadian policy, but he doesn't appreciate the situation he's in. The conservatives is that people are angry at the United States because the United States has been saying to Canada, You're spending 1.37 on your defense expenditures. You are one of only 8 nations that refuses to honor your 2014 promises to spend 2% of GDP. And this is especially shameful for you because in World War II, you had the 3rd largest navy in the world for a while. You had your own beach at Normandy. You were the Dieppe raid, you suffered, you were courageous, and now to see this, and our open border has always been secure, and it was not secured by Trudeau on your part. And so, and you're running anywhere, depending on how you figured, a $63 to $100 billion surplus. You've got asymmetrical tariffs. And so when Trump emphasized those, all of what I just said, but, in the Trump art of the deal, it's loser, 51 state, then it made it impossible for a conservative to object to what the liberals were saying about Trump, because then they would say that he was a Trump puppet. So then he was critical or more critical of Trump, and that meant that Trump was critical of him, and so he lost. It was a lose-lose situation for the conservatives. If they objected to what Trudeau has done, and Carney, is that his name, Carney? Yeah, Carney. If they objected to that, then they were on the side of the United States. I mean, if they were supported Trump and they objected to everything, they were on the United States. If they joined the liberals to denounce Trump, is pretty much what they did, then there was no difference between them. They were not able to articulate a particular view. They were just lumped in, well, if you feel like the liberal people do, and Carney doesn't like Trump, and you agree with him, then why change governments? So it was a very hard thing to do. And yet Trump couldn't come out and endorse the conservatives, because then that would be the kiss of death. And it was very hard, if you look at the art of the deal, no one, and we talked about this, I wrote about it, nobody believed that he was going to invade Panama. But on the other hand, nobody believed that Obama or Biden or anybody had any ability to force the Chinese back out of Panama. And that what Panama was doing was they were being intimidated by the Chinese. They brought in, like a guest they brought in and wouldn't leave. And they had port facilities at the entry and the exit that were used for espionage and mercantile, a whole thing. So Donald Trump said we might have to reject that, renew. Panamanians got nationalistic. Long story short, there's a 50-50 chance that this BlackRock deal will go through, and there will be an American company for the first time in years that will be controlling the entry and exit, and the Panamanians will be relying on our defense, and China will be... Nobody would have been able to do that, but Trump did it by this rhetoric. Same thing with Greenland. We want Greenland. Nobody ever thought he was going to absorb Greenland, but after it was all said and done, Denmark put in an extra $1 billion at the disposal of its colony, its North American colony. And we do have a base there, and the Greenland people got more autonomy, and it worked. And the same thing with, I don't know yet with Canada, but in the process of all this, it gets chaotic. But I don't think anybody in Canada ever believed that they were going to be the 51st state. What Trump was saying is, you people have disappointed us. You running surplus with your friends. You didn't patrol your border with your friends. You didn't arm as you were supposed to with your friends. You would just be better off as a 51st. And just as a footnote to that little rant, nobody wants Canada to be a 51st state. That would be like getting California and Oregon and Massachusetts on steroids as a state.
Yeah. Well, Victor, we're going to get your thoughts on lady astronauts. I don't even know if they're astronauts, ladies who went up in a thing. Before that, I just want to get to something you said before. You mentioned the Bernie Sanders AOC, the Fighting Oligarchy tour. I do want to note that they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on private jets doing that. Then Liz McDonald from Fox wrote about, who are these people? The Bernie Sanders crowd. They are the Coachella rich and elite, already making an average of $84,000. That's more than the U.S. median. And they're only 25 years old. This is who Bernie Sanders prefers to preach anti-capitalism and big government to. 60% of them financed. Well, this goes on and on. So that's kind of like who are participating at those things. And then one last thing I just have to throw in there. There was one of the Sanders rallies was interrupted by these two really kind of outrageous black ladies and young ladies, and it seemed to fall apart. I wasn't watching it on C-SPAN, but these things just seem like tailor-made for benefiting Republicans.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of great midterm commercials. On the Republican side, they're so rich. They should have a commercial with Senator Holland with the margaritas arrayed talking to the M13 person. They should have all of those, CNN clips of people saying they didn't like the United States and hate all of that. And I don't quite understand the discrepancy. I understand limousine liberals and all of that. We've always had that. But this radical movement that's taking over the Democratic Party is all the percentage of people who are at college, in college, graduated from college is just way out of proportion, over 50%. And the affluence meter is high. They're not representative. And that's true every time you watch the people who were being picked up for the vandalism of Tesla. Did you see that there was a mental health advisor, a woman that was a therapist, was scratching, destroying things? And every time I read about it, it's some usually, and I'm stereotyping, but I think the stereotype would be supported by data, a white person, male or female, probably over the age of 50, and with some type of either 2-year or 4-year or even a higher degree. And that might apply also to the people who are leveling threats about shooting people, killing people. Kind of the Mangione, that's kind of what the profile is now of the left. And then that begs the question, why now? What is going on? It reminds me of the 70s, the late 60s and 70s, that when you look at the people in the Symbolize Liberation, Army and all of that stuff, they were mostly white. They were educated. They came from affluent families, and they were searching for meaning and violence. And it was kind of directed at what they thought was middle class, clueless, reactionary, deserving of violence America. And these people do not like, when Trump says they hate America, he should be more specific. They hate the middle class. They feel they have no culture, they have no taste, they don't have the romance of the poor, and they don't have their money and their sophistication. They can't stand them. They look at a Trump rally and they say, compare a Trump rally to Coachella. All those people have American flags. They all look the same. You look at Coachella, we've got nudity, we got LGBTQ, TQ, we've got hate America, we've got all this weird stuff. It's so much more exciting. There's music and da-da-da-da-da. And
well, that thing you said before, Victor, about someone saying, what's the next step has to be killing. You go back 50 years, maybe I'm just riffing here, patina of flower power and groovy love-ins, all that kind of weirdness. Not to say there wasn't terrible violence, right? Bill Ayers and company were bombing everything left and right, Black Panthers were murdering people, so it was a terrible time. But at least it had that kind of, patina. It doesn't. There's no such thing now. There's no.
Yeah, what happened with that is
lovey-dovey aspect to any of this. They really do just hate, pure and simple.
we talked about a little bit in this early 60s, the 62 to 68. It started out with Monterey pop and Peter, Paul and Mary and folk music and Bob Dylan without electric guitars, Joan Baez, very left wing, but mostly music and art.
Yeah.
And then it gravitated into the flower power, Summer of Love, San Francisco, 1968. Come to San Francisco, all that stuff. And it was Cher, it was kind of a communist utopia, Lotus Eaters, Timothy Leary, Drop Out, Tune In, Turn On. And then that didn't work. It didn't stop the Vietnam War. It didn't change America. And the wire-rimmed glasses, the way the Beatles had transmogrified from kind of silly shaggy hair to, really freaked out looking. And then everybody moved on. And so by the 70s, a lot of these hippies that's what, they were yuppies. That's where the word came from. And, that The Great Pretender, that great song. And, so my point is there was a hardcore element that stayed. And that was the Bill Ayers, that was the Charles Manson, that was the hardcore. They looked like hippies, but they never wanted to move on and join what they called the establishment. They wanted to destroy it. Yeah. That was a Weatherman underground. And what's weird about this group is, and you're absolutely right, Jack, that these people have adopted the anger and the violence of that extreme post-hippie movement, that type of rebellion. They're not calling for let's peace and love. When, as I mentioned, this PhD student at George Mason said he wanted to kill people. And you hear that a lot. And when, I won't mention names, but there were a lot of reputable people who, when Donald Trump was almost killed, I think, I'll mention, I like him, John McWhorter, but right on Glenn Lowry's podcast, he said that it might have been better if Trump had been shot. So my point is that this is a hardcore, this is not the French revolutionary people of 1789 and 90 that were trying to get rid of the Bourbons, create a constitutional monarchy and a parliament, and maybe emulate what Britain had done with the king versus the parliament, and gradually disseminate the focus and loci of power to executive, judicial, legislative branch. That was what the French Revolution, I think the original 1789 people were for. But by 1792, you've got what we've got now. These are hardcore revolutionaries, and they're wealthy people, just like during the French Revolution, just like Bill Ayers. He was the son of a utility executive. They were all wealthy, and these people are very wealthy that are leading this group and funding it.
I still think of these Coke commercials of, I want to teach the world to drink a Coke and love, and everyone holding hands on a hill, and there's none of that coverage anymore. Blue Origin, Victor, Blue Origin N31, and the people on it were Katy Perry, Lauren Sanchez, who is the soon-to-be bride of Jeff Bezos, Gayle King from CBS, I don't know the other ladies, Amanda Nguyen, Aisha Bowe, Carrie Ann Flynn. They're all astronauts. Some commentator wrote they're a bunch of Botox, duck-lipped millionaires, billionaires playing astronaut for 10 minutes. Victor, boy, oh boy, has this thing been commented on.
I know.
What are your thoughts?
The Bezos rocket looked impressive, and the mission was flawless, and the capsule came down, didn't go in the ocean. It hit hard. It looked good, but the point is, what was the point? Because it just went up for 11 minutes and came down. Maybe it was just a trial. I mean, there is an element. I mean, if somebody said, Victor, would you like to get on a rocket and go off at 3,000 miles an hour or something and come back down to Earth? I'd say I don't know. So there was an element of danger, but what was the point? And I think the point was that they were trying to say Bezos' empire was that Elon is not the only person doing this, but Elon is the only person doing this, because while this was going on, Elon had just rescued people in deep space, and Elon had just launched another whole series of rockets flawlessly that had put satellites all around the globe and is offering high-speed internet, not just to the Ukrainian resistance to the invasion by Russia, but to everybody. And he's already planning a sophisticated mission to the moon, to Mars. So he's so far ahead. And then I saw the women in the rescue, the woman none of them were made up, Jack. They didn't have Botox. They were serious feminists. That's what feminism is about. A woman going on a mission to outer space that everybody was worried might not work. They had been stranded there. They had been courageous, man and woman. And another woman came in to rescue them. And there was no distinction between the task, between male or female. There was a point to it. And they were heroic. And they proved that women can do just what men can in space. Okay. But this, why have all women? And then why don't you just reverse it and say, well, we're going to put all the women in the guidance center and the engineering center, and we'll put 11 men up there, or 7 men. I don't think a lot of men would want to do it. If you said that we're going to select people by only their gender. So they were trying to say we're going to show that women can do this, but they only put women up there, but they didn't go the whole way and say if women are going to be up there, then women should be able to program the spacecraft and engineer the fuel and load the fuel. But they didn't do that. And then to have them kind of correct people on the air, you shouldn't say mankind, I don't want to be, again, they were courageous to be in there in the first place, but it looked like a fashion show. True women are like men, that women who do these so-called male tasks that originally does it, and they do them well, and they do them as equally as men. They're like men that don't comb their hair every day. They're not like Gavin Newsom, versions of Gavin Newsom, female version. And you didn't see the female, the woman who was, I guess, almost 60, trapped up there for months. I didn't see her, with evidence of Botox or makeup or any of that stuff. And that's what was so sad about it.
Gosh, I wonder how they're doing. I'm going away for the weekend, and you don't come back for 9 months, and who knows if you're ever going to come back.
I think they could have been brought back much earlier.
Yeah.
And it was a political decision not to have a risky mission during the campaign.
Those are terrible things. A great movie, A Man in the Hole, that Kirk Douglas movie. You can get the guy out, but you're not going to get him out because you want the headlines. You play the politics, and these things are just terrible. Anyway, Victor, we have to talk about your views on Donald Trump and Harvard. Now, I know you talked about them with the great Sammy Wink, but you've written about this, and we have a new headline out today that Donald Trump is going after Harvard for yet another $1 billion. And we'll get your thoughts as we round the turn into the home stretch. And we will be back with your thoughts after these important final messages.
Let's be honest, we're not getting any younger. And if you want to look and feel your best, you need to check out Pure Health Research. They have 45 premium health supplements designed to help with every health goal, whether it's boosting your energy, trimming belly fat, supporting healthy blood sugar, pumping your testosterone up, or even reducing swelling in your legs. Pure Health Research Supplement Store has you covered. Each formula is crafted with natural, non-GMO ingredients backed by clinical research and manufactured right here in the USA. And here's the best part. Pure Health Research is offering you an exclusive 35% discount. Just go to purehealthresearch.com and use the coupon code VICTOR at checkout. With their 365-day money-back guarantee, there's zero risk in trying something new. So why wait? Head over to purehealthresearch.com now. Explore their 45 amazing supplements and save 35% before this deal ends with the coupon code VICTOR. Don't miss this chance to feel your best.
We're back with Victor Davis Hanson's show. I mentioned earlier, by the way, Victor's got a website, The Blade of Perseus. VictorHanson.com is the address. please do go there. Why? Because you'll find archives of these podcasts. A lot of new listeners, a lot of new viewers. They want to know what has happened before. You'll find them here. Links to Victor's various books, his other appearances, the articles he writes, and he's going to talk about one in a minute. He writes weekly an essay for American Greatness, weekly syndicated column. And then twice a week, he writes an exclusive article for the Blade of Perseus, and then he gives an exclusive video for the Blade of Perseus. So that's, do subscribe, $65 a year. That's discounted from $6.50 a month. And hey, if your mom is a Victor fan, get her a subscription. Mother's Day is coming up. Father's Day is coming up soon. Yeah.
I would say something. I've been bombarded lately at I don't know. I mean, I have an office where I have a person I've hired to go through everything, but I've been bombarded. I feel really bad by people. I guess they get my address off the internet and they send books, and then they send cash or something for the mailing. So, and they want me to sign. I want to sign them, but for me to get like one every 2 days or 2 or 3 a day or something, and then I have to go into town and sign them and go stand in line at UPS or the post office to resend them. It's a lot so I'm behind is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
But I got nice notes from people. Thank you for the podcast. Would you please sign this book, or this book enclosed is, a label. All you have to do is go to UPS, or here's an Amazon gift card and you can use it. But the way it works here in the rural California, it takes a long time to go up, and I've been doing it now but I don't know. I think our podcast has got a little bit more attention than usual, but so it's not just one a month. It's like 3 or 4 or 5 a week sometime.
Go to the post office, you meet people in masks and other strange things. Okay.
Oh, I don't want to get into that, what I see at the post office.
All right, Victor, here's a headline. Trump to yank another billion in funding from Harvard. And this is from today's New York Post. We're recording on April 21st, Monday. President Trump reportedly plans to pull an additional $1 billion in funding from Harvard University just a week after freezing $2.2 billion in multi-year federal grants over the Ivy League school's refusal to make changes to curb alleged anti-Semitism and overhaul admissions policies. The latest punishment comes after Harvard released a lengthy list of demands from the Trump administration that White House officials had thought would remain private, sources told the Wall Street Journal. Victor, what are your evolving thoughts on the Trump versus Harvard war?
Well, Harvard, this is an art of the deal, everybody. So Harvard has not addressed anti-Semitism, and they said they were going to do it, and then they said they were not going to allow classes to be disrupted. They just had one, I guess, 2 weeks ago at Kennedy School of Government. They haven't addressed it. They said they were not going to disobey the Supreme Court, but they're finding ways they still use race in a variety of manifestations, and they're just not committed. So Trump wanted to get their attention, so he gave them a whole list of demands. And some people on the right, I think Heather McDonald said, you really shouldn't do this because you're micromanaging the university and you don't want to get into it. Well, I would just say that that's what has been happening from the left. They go into a university and they say, Title IX, you're going to restructure your entire... I was at Cal State Fresno, and they just came in and said, this number of people, we're not going to give you federal fundings unless you have this number of women athletes. And by the way, if you can't do it in baseball, then you're going to have a huge equestrian program. And that's what you're going to do, whether you like it or not. And then they came in and said, then you're going to hit affirmative action guide. Whether you like it or not, it's disparate impact and proportional. So they did it all the time. And so my point is, yes, the federal government shouldn't micromanage, but they can. And then this wasn't Trump. This was a commission that he had appointed, that people who knew a lot about what was going on in the university. I think Harvard's making a mistake. It's up to $9 billion possible loss per annum, and they've already done 2. Now he's added another $1 billion cut. And I would just say to Harvard what I would say to where I work at Stanford and all these places. I don't think you want to get into a public fight with the federal government, because you, as I said in this column today, you're like a mossy rock on a hillside. You look really nice, granite, picturesque, there's an oak tree, but you turn that rock over and there's all sorts of creepy things underneath it. So if the public realizes what you're doing, they're not going to support it. And what do you mean by that, Victor? If they know that a surcharge or an overhead is 10 to 15% in business, and they see that when a scholar gets a federal check, these universities are taking anywhere from 30 to 60%, even in the age of Zoom, where some of these scholars are Zooming and they're not going to support that. And that's like $180 million a year from where I work. So that's not defensible. If they find out that at your universities, if somebody is angry or has legitimate reasons or ill and says that person sexually harassed me, or that person said this type of word, hate speech, you are not going to go before a university panel and face your accuser. They're not going to be identified, and you're not going to go there with legal counsel. You're going to have an administrator probably put you on suspension, de facto, at least until scrutiny happens. That's what happens. If you are at these universities and you can't, because of the 14th Amendment or a recent Supreme Court ruling, you cannot discriminate or segregate. Can't be separate but equal. Plessy versus Ferguson. You can't do that by race. You can't do it at all. But here's how they do it. They say, you know what? We're going to have the main graduation for everybody. But then we're going to have auxiliary graduations based on race. So we're going to have the Asian, we're going to have maybe the gender, women, we're going to have the Hispanic and the Black graduation. Now, they're open to anybody, but they're primarily focused on these racial groups. And you go to these things, and I was at Cal State Fresno. There are nobody there but that particular group, and by design. If during the Latino graduation at Fresno State, if I showed up, I would be out. A student once asked me to go there because he graduated. I was just, it wasn't, I wasn't, there weren't many people who were not Latino. But my point is, if you say another minority, Jewish groups do not have their own graduations. Whites don't. And you'll say, well, they're the majority. No, they're not. At Stanford, they're 20 to 22% white. If you had a white, you wouldn't use the word white. You just said, after the main graduation, to honor the legacy of the European Western tradition of which this university and its free speech and constitutionalism is, and Renaissance art, we want to emphasize that legacy. So we're going to have a European American graduation for the small minority of 20% at Stanford. They would go ballistic, and they should go ballistic. I wouldn't want to go to it, but that's what they would do. They don't do that. So what Trump is saying is, we know what you're doing. You are using safe spaces, and then they'll say to you, well, we don't have segregated dorms. We have theme houses. And then you actually look at it very carefully, and you see that the African-American or whatever African term they use, or the Latino, La Raza, whatever it is, that's 99% of that particular race. So we know what you're doing. And the same thing about admissions. We know what you're trying to do. We know that you're trying to get away. If there's an executive order that says no DI, then you're going to have the Department of Belonging or Community Outreach. And that's what they're doing. And they have utter contempt. And then they know that when the federal government went in and guaranteed student loans, they being higher education in general, they started packaging student aid as a federal guaranteed loan. We can get that for you. So if you pay $100,000 a year at Columbia or Harvard or Yale or Princeton for room, tuition, and board, we'll get an element. It will be a student loan. They don't care whether you ever pay it back. They get it up front, that there's a $1.7 trillion out there, and about 12 to 13% of that is either delayed, people haven't, they just walked away, or they're late on their payments. The universities don't care. They could care less. If you said to Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, you've got these huge endowments, you're going to pledge those against student loans. So you have your financial package, and it's $100,000 a year for everything. You're going to loan what you don't give outright. I will swear that they will have a program to make sure you graduate in 4 years. They will monitor you. They will guide you on your major. They will tell how much your major makes, and they will get every cent out of you. But when you take the moral hazard and you transfer in the government, and the next thing people don't understand about this rock that's been turned over, in the last 30 years, there's been about $60 billion from foreign governments. And almost all of them, with the exception of a few EU nations and maybe a few South Korea or Japan, but compared to who's really giving, it's mostly Middle East autocracies, and in particular, countries that send thousands of students. Qatar, China, United Arab Emirates, all of these countries. And this year alone, just 2 countries, Communist China and Qatar, sent $500 million in just this last fiscal year. And what is that money for? That is to set up a professorship, a Middle East Studies program, courses in a Confucius Institute, and that is to what? In the case of Communist China, it is to make sure you got 300,000 students here, and you make sure that they go back and report what they saw, what they do, and that 2,000 or 3,000 are actively involved in transferring technology. So all you have to do is look at a Chinese submarine, aircraft carrier, jet craft, anything. It's based on U.S. or European or Western research. That's what they're here for. And the universities know that because they charge them 100% no discount, maybe 105% with overhead. And if the public knew that, how reliant they are on federal cash, and these universities that are bastions of anti-Americanism, you're too conservative, you're too reactionary, and then they take money from a country that has 1 million Uyghurs working in slave conditions, or the Qatar, where I think, 10% of the population is probably Arabic, and the rest are indentured servants, kind of
slaves,
labor imported from Indonesia, the Philippines, India. It's not a very liberal paradigm, and they don't care. And then if you look at surveys, and there's a lot of them. Just go Google proportion of conservative faculty at higher education. It's about 2 to 10%. I think I just looked at a study. Bryn Mawr had 135 faculty, not one registered Republican. Williams was about the same. And so they don't make any pretense about diversity. And everybody's, well, Victor, they have an open search. They're required to. Yes, they do. And they also, until recently, had basically McCarthy-era loyalty oaths, called diversity statements. And that was really a tip-off. Can you please explain, in your undergraduate, graduate, and scholarly career, in your teaching, how have you made a personal commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion? And they have a way of weeding it out. I know that because I get an email about every 3 days, and it goes like this. Dear Professor Hanson, I got my PhD in political science history, fill in the blank, and I've been in trouble getting a job. Is there any way that you know anybody at Hoover that would could you blurb my book? That kind of stuff. They don't have a network that help, and they're systematically excluded. I could go on. But when you look at all the things they're doing, trying to get around DEI, segregated ceremonies, safe spaces, theme houses, and it's all the money they take from abroad. If you look at the last 30 years, higher education, with few exceptions, has doubled the rate of inflation on their tuition, room, and board. I know that Hillsdale is cheaper to live than Yale or Harvard or Stanford, But right now, as I speak, it's about $46,000 to go to Hillsdale and pay room, board, and tuition. It's about 95 to 100. It's not double. And why isn't it? Because Hillsdale doesn't take any federal money, and their students are not on federal funds. I'm not saying that they would do that anyway. They wouldn't, but they can't, and because they guarantee the student support, and they want those students to be happy. They want them to be educated. They want them to be competitive. They want them out in 4 years, and they want them to be productive and pay back any loans that they take. And so everything about the university is something that the public would object to. And if they get into a big fight with the federal government, I guarantee you we're going to learn about the overhead they charge. We're going to learn about the politicalization and weaponization of the faculty. We're going to learn about the racial segregation in graduation spaces, dorms. We're going to learn about how they cheat on affirmative action and DEI. We're going to learn about all of that. We're going to look about all the federal money and where it goes. We're going to look at the courses and see, if you look at the economics department or anything, how many courses are on Hayek or Tom Sowell versus Marx, da-da-da-da-da. And the public is going to be shocked. And I'm just scratching the surface. So they have a lot of liability. And yet, I guess they figure that there's a lot of Supreme Court or district judges that all went to Harvard, and they're always going to rule on their behalf. I don't know, but I think they're sorely mistaken. And when you look at polls, there's America Speak recent poll. It's about 30% of the population has a positive view of higher education. And it doesn't work anymore. They used to say, you cut this, and you don't understand the role that we do in sophisticated medical research and engineering. We do understand that. And that's why it's really bad on your part, because you hide behind those departments and you make it hard for them. And already they're changing. So a lot of those medical grants are doing their DEI, this underserved community. Time. Exactly.
Yeah.
But they use them. They kind of, well, we're commies and humanities and social science, but you can't cut anything because we got this great engineering that's working on a rocket. That's kind of the argumentation they use.
Yeah.
And it's, even in those departments, engineering, science, calculus, math, physics, it's pretty much dominated by liberal faculty. Not as much, but everything about it has changed. It's just not what it was at one time.
The brand has been tarnished.
Too much money. Too much money.
Let me make a statement on behalf of an institution we rarely mention, Grove City College, which was the trailblazer in not accepting federal aid. And our friend,
a very good college.
Yeah, and our friend, our friend, and he remind me of this. And I just checked their tuition and room and board, etc. Grove City does not accept federal aid, and it's less than $40,000 a year, akin to Hillsdale. So, bravo, Grove City. And if you're looking for colleges that are traditional and offer solid education and don't cost you an arm and a leg and have a valuable brand to some degree, Grove City is a place to check out. By the way, Victor, I did want to mention, as you mentioned, that you talked about the alternate graduation ceremonies Chris Rufo put out related to Harvard. They're called affinity celebrations, and they are for graduates with disabilities, indigenous, first gen, next gen. Then there's one glob of honoring Asian American, Pacific Islander, Desi American graduates. I don't know what a Desi American is. Black graduates, Latinx, as I say, graduates, Arab graduates. And then the one that's not an affinity celebration, it's a lavender celebration that honors LGBTQ graduates. Is he right? No white
I would
affinity,
add
no Jew affinity.
I would add that the disability ones and some of the genders were added on over the years because the original were just purely race and they were getting criticism, Latino, Black, Asian, da-da. And now they said, well, it's not about race, it's about every unique group's characteristics. And why not just say unity, that we're all the same, that we're all human beings and our whatever differences are superficial. to the eye, and why don't we try to unite for a change? Why do you turn out people that leave those places wanting to be tribal and to identify first with people like them, or that think their race is essential? Every time I had a student in the Cal State system that identified by race, I did too. I think I mentioned that on a podcast. I had a young woman who said, every time I had her in class, she said, as a Latina, I can't relate to Herodotus. This is a course in Greek literature and translation. And I would say, as a Swedish American, I can't relate to that question. And then she would call the dean, and the dean would call me. What the hell are you doing, Victor? And I said, I'm trying to make a point that it's ridiculous to self-identify by your race. It's your ideas that matter. And I tutor hundreds of Latino kids, and none of them do that, just this one. So why, I think we're getting to the point where I'm worried about higher education, because there's a lot of good things about it, and it's not. We've talked about the sins of commission, Jack, but we haven't talked about the sins of omission. All of this emphases that we've talked about, the effort to segregate dorms, the effort to go through and identify what is that guy's race now? Let me look at his name. Do you think he's 40% Latino? You think he's 10% black? Did they send a picture? I had a student say they sent 23andMe to show that he was what his racial purity was. So my point is, that's a lot of work. And then when you have people, the fundamental thing is, you say all during the 90s and the 80s that we are Harvard and we are very selective, Jack. We take the 98, we reject 97%, and our graduates have about an 780 SAT, and we have a very sophisticated freshman calculus. Okay, that was your standards, and that's why you separated yourself from Cal State Fresno or Cal State Baker. I get that. And now what are you doing? You're introducing remedial math at Harvard and remedial math at Stanford, because according to your admissions policy, your famous math classes that were required of most students, your students can't do it. And yet, what are you going to do? You're going to give them basically a high school remedial at these prestigious classes. And how's that going to work out for you when that student goes and sees an employer? Well, I can tell you how it's worked out. There's a lot of employers in Silicon Valley who look at these blue chip and they say, you know what? They don't know much at all. They don't know much about history. They don't know much about language. They don't know much about science or math. I'd rather have a guy or a girl from Georgia Tech or Clemson or something. Not these people. And I don't mean these people. I mean all the people from Stanford and so they're not meritocratic. And I don't say they have to be, but they said they were. They said, they used to brag in the 70s and 80s how hard it was to get into our school. It was just impossible because we have curriculum classes that nobody can do unless you have that preparation and that aptitude. And that's why when we graduate, these are the leaders and shakers of the whole world. Well, that's not true anymore. And their courses are a joke, a lot of them. They're all political. They don't teach the inductive Socratic. They don't say to the freshmen, you are here to be inductive, not deductive. You are to look at examples, phenomena, and then you are to draw a thesis from it. You're not going to start with a thesis and then apply it to individual and make them fit. And then in addition to the inductive method, we're going to give you the tools of a basic education. You're going to know what a Doric column is. You're going to know what the Pythagorean. You're going to know who Lincoln was. You're going to know what the Battle of Gettysburg. We're going to give you all those facts so you're educated. They don't do that at all.
Victor has 6 apples. Jack takes 3 apples. How does Sammy feel? That's what education is now. Hey, Victor, we've come to the near conclusion. We thank our listeners and viewers who leave comments. There's so many comments now to get through, especially on YouTube. But here are 2 I'm going to read quick. This is just from a few days ago. This is from Thomas V9258, who writes, I'm a senior economist at my company. Don't sell yourself short, VDH. You're more intelligent than most economists and absolutely way more intelligent than any commenter. Okay. And then we have another one from Michael L. Wilson, 7971, who writes, the other day, when you told the story of your namesake and about the ring you wear, I was deeply moved and even more proud to be an American. Your dad was right. You had a lot to live up to. I think the original Victor would be very proud of you. Thank you for all
That's very
you
nice.
do.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
That was a wonderful, I
We
hate to
never
call it
know
a
until
story.
it's over, though, do we?
Well, for your,
Everything shall be revealed when it's over.
yeah, that's my fear when I get to see my life on a movie before
Well,
I get put
really
in the damn
scared when
elevator.
every time I look at my mother's copy of The Inferno and I see those Gustave Doré illustrations
Yeah.
of the eighth ring or the seventh ring, those pitchforks and horn.
Yeah, make room for Fowler. So, hey, Victor, speaking of Fowler, I'm wearing my hoodie here, Amphil, which has a
congratulations.
Well, thank you. It came as a Christmas gift from the company. We have the Center for Civil Society at Amphil, a related nonprofit. It publishes the Civil Thoughts. That's the free weekly email newsletter I write every week. At the center, we're trying to strengthen civil society. The point of Civil Thoughts is just to give 14 recommended readings, great articles I've come across the previous week that I think dear intelligent Americans will like. So why don't you go to civilthoughts.com, sign up. Again, it's free. We're not selling your name. I know you're going to like it. And I thank the many people who write me to say that they have enjoyed Civil Thoughts immensely. Victor, you've been terrific through all the apple bites and the dealing with medication and whatever. You just
I've never had a sinus infection for 7 weeks, but it's going to end because I said so. How's that?
we will just pray directly to God.
I'm going to be a Nietzschean figure.
Well, you're indestructible. You will recover. Hey, thanks, Victor, for all the wisdom you shared. Thanks, folks, for tuning in, listening, watching, writing to us. And we will be back soon with another episode of the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.